all that to say, yes, stress, malnourishment is causing a hormonally challenged culture. And we're seeing the highest rates of anxiety and depression in our culture today. Take time to eat. Take time to love on yourself.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Digest This podcast. I'm your host, Bethany Cameron, and today is such a treat because I have on the show Dr. Chris Motley and Courtney Bursich, who are the hosts of the Ancient Health podcast, and we dive into so many topics, in particular, the vagus nerve and how it affects our digestion and overall well-being, the gut-brain axis, coffee enemas, and how everyone should be doing them if you're experiencing chronic infections, chronic stress, and tips on how to be in a calm state before eating. We also talk about the connection between our gut health and our hormones and so much more. This was such a fun time hanging with this dynamic duo. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. But before we get into today's episode, shout out to podcast listener HZ4416. They titled it Refreshing and Helpful and gave this podcast 5 stars. They wrote, "These podcasts are so great. I really found the soy one enlightening. Excited to hear about the benefits quality soy can bring. Can't wait to try the sprouted tofu from Trader Joe's too." Thank you so much for that review and rating. And if you haven't done so, I always encourage my listeners to rate and review the podcast. It helps the podcast grow and get into more ears, and it's a free way to support. So I truly appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Do you want free Coconut Colds? I'm giving away 2 large jars of Coconut Cold's original chocolate flavor and their limited edition strawberry lemonade flavor to 2 of my podcast listeners for the month of September. This is $80 worth of organic, vegan, dairy-free coconut yogurt with living probiotic cultures you can literally feel working right when it hits your tongue all the way down into your belly. You can't get this limited edition flavor in stores, and you have to be a Coconut Cult member to even get their limited flavors, unless you enter to win. All you have to do is rate and review this podcast to enter. That's it. So be sure to leave your Instagram handle in your review because that is how I will be reaching out to both winners. So again, if you want $80 worth of Coconut Colt's probiotic vegan yogurt in chocolate and their limited edition flavor, strawberry lemonade, just give this show a 5-star rating and review. Good luck. Multiple studies point to a link between dehydration and a higher risk of anxiety and depression. And if you have low levels of electrolytes, it can cause anxiety or panic-like symptoms. Some of the most common causes of electrolyte imbalance are due to fluid loss. Adding electrolytes is a great way to replenish and rebalance your body, mind, and mood. However, most electrolyte drink mixes contain added gums, sugars, colors, and even added oils. I'm really picky about what goes into my body, so that's why I choose Element's raw, unflavored electrolyte mix. Element's unflavored version contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of salt, magnesium, and potassium. Those 3 simple ingredients are in their raw, unflavored packs. So whether you just finished a workout, sauna session, or just need to hydrate for your mental health, Element is formulated to help anyone with their electrolyte needs and is perfectly suited for those following a keto, low-carb, vegan, or paleo diet. And right now, Element is offering my listeners a free sample pack with any purchase. That's 8 single-serving packets free with any Element order. Element also has a no questions asked refund policy. So if you try it, don't like it, they will give you your money back, guaranteed, no questions asked. So you have nothing to lose. Just go to drinklmnt.com/digest to get this amazing offer. Thank you so much, Dr. Chris Motley and Courtney Bursich, for coming on the show today.
Oh, so happy to be here. Thanks for having us, Bethany.
Yes, thank you so much. Appreciate it so much, the invitation.
Well, this is a little bit different because typically I have just one guest, but so now we have 3 people in the conversation today. So it's easy when you have 2 people and you can kind of go back and forth, but I don't want to interrupt any of your guys' thoughts because you have so much to share. And in particularly, I really want to hone in on the vagus nerve. And I just like to start my podcast in just full force, right? So can you guys explain what is the vagus nerve, first of all, and how is it connected to basically every part of our body? Because for those that don't know, just simple terms here.
Well, do you want to start, Court, or do you want me to start?
I think that the people need to hear it from you, Chris, because let's be honest, this is your wheelhouse. We're a great partnership, but you bring the clinical mindset and you break it down pretty easily. So for all of you listening, this is a treat because he's like the best teacher I know. So I'm going to let you have the floor on this one.
She's basically saying that I'm a very good nerd. But thank you, Court. But when we did the podcast about vagus nerve, yes, we always try to simplify it. So in reality, the vagus nerve is basically cranial nerve 10. So you have a series of nerves in your cranium, in your brain, and this nerve is the nerve that regulates your calming effect. So we call it a parasympathetic nerve. And so this nerve exits the base of the skull and it goes through the body and it literally connects to almost every single organ in your body. So it gives a parasympathetic signal. And what that means is that it helps your body to what? Down regulate. It helps to slow down your breathing. It helps to reduce your heart rate, your blood pressure. It's what gives a signal to your digestion to actually digest food instead of putting the blood flow to your extremities to run from a problem or fight a problem. Now, when you look at the pathway of the vagus nerve, if you look in physiology books, it literally has small branches that not only just go to the major organs, but the small organs we don't even think about, like even the trachea, the windpipe, the esophagus, even to your thyroid. So when you have a vagus nerve that's connected to the whole system, anything that could injure or damage or even compress the vagus nerve could actually decrease the parasympathetic signals that go into the rest of the body. So it can put you into fight or flight if that nerve is ever compressed, damaged, or has even an infection in the area of the skull that actually can decrease that parasympathetic signal. So I always refer to it as like volume or thermostat. I say whatever can turn up the parasympathetic volume, great. Whatever down regulates, which means this, if you decrease the signals in the parasympathetic area, it could be sympathetic signals, which means you're sympathizing with everybody and going into fight or flight. And you do that consistently enough, you're going to train that nerve to carry only those high energy signals. And so vagus nerves are very, very important, not only to say your digestion or your overall calmness, but metabolically, it has a big impact. And also how you perceive reality, too. That's another emotional aspect of it we can talk about. But that's the vagus nerve, hopefully in a simplistic notion for all of you out there that are listening.
No, yeah, I love it. And you mentioned if it could get damaged. What are some ways that it could get damaged? Could it just be like you're out of alignment and boom, it gets pinched? Or how does that happen?
Yeah, there's many ways. I think one of the biggest things that we often overlook, even in a clinical setting, is if somebody literally had a concussion or hit their head or they had a trauma when they were young. I've had patients that come in and injured their head or got into a car wreck. That's a simple, I say simple, but it's a compression or an injury to the cranium that can actually impede the signals going down the system. One of the biggest things that I often find, though, is the presence of infections that are in the head that can injure the vagus nerve. So if individuals come in and they've had strep, chronic strep, like let's say a patient came in and said, hey, I've had strep 5 times a year when I was a kid. I literally have patients that say, I took antibiotics almost every day for 4 or 5 years straight. I don't know how their gut survived, but they literally have had strep every year, or they had staph, or they had E. coli, or even chronic viral infections in the head. The toxins or the poop that they give off literally can cause inflammation and irritate the skull and the cranium and all the nerves in it. And furthermore, the body will actually try to produce oxidants to what? Kill off the infection. So it creates oxygen species. That in itself could put a lot of tension on the vagus nerve, especially if they ever got bit by a tick or mosquito, or they had chronic sinus infections and the lymph built up in the back of the head, because that's especially where that vagus nerve's at. So have you ever had it where it's like, man, people say, I got headaches back here, or I feel like my neck's always stiff at the base of my skull? I don't drain my lymph nodes. My neck's always congested. My tonsils, my sinuses are always draining. And they think, man, I have high, rapid heart rate. My blood pressure spikes all of a sudden for no apparent reason. And I have seen it, and I'm thankful that I've been able to help individuals with vagus nerve issues only because we just cleaned up some of their infections. So if you ever had an infection that was chronic in your youth, I don't care if you're 2 years old, 5 years old, and you're 45 years old now, those things can incubate, and those can cause vagus nerve injury as you get older.
Wow. I mean, mind blown.
I mean, that's the nerd portion of it, but I'm glad we can talk about a few other things, but that's it.
I love it. I love it. Now, do you feel like most Americans are in a constant fight or flight mode?
I think this is a good one for Courtney. She explains this so well. This is yeah. Courtney's real house. Go for it, girl.
Well, I would venture to say that most people have poor vagal tone because of chronic stress. And I think that it is important to realize that the vagus nerve is a bidirectional highway, essentially. It's this gut-brain axis. And so there's information, there's actually more signals that come from the gut to the brain than the brain to the gut. And what happens a lot of times is that we get stuck in these patterns, right? So maybe things that we're consciously doing, and there may be unconscious or subconscious contributors to our stress load. And what happens is this perpetual signaling of the body to stay in sympathetic dominance now tells the digestive system, hey, we need to put the brakes on digesting food, building enzymes, stomach acid, all of these things that are going to help protect you from infection. So if you think about it now, and I live this firsthand. So this is something that, we all learn from experience, right? And so I can tell you this from a personal experience of having about 8 years of chronic gut infections. Many of this stemmed initially from having breast implants. I've since explanted. But what happened is that those implants created kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. Like so much, it was like my body was under a lot of stress. I had 2 babies. My body's trying to find its hormonal balance. And all of a sudden, I decided to get implants. And that's really when the wheels just started to come off. And so inflammation starts taking over. The brain is sensing there's a toxic overwhelm. The immune system is really kicked into high gear, which is okay for a short period of time. But with the presence of the implants, it created chronic, like a more long-term inflammatory response. Well, the brain keeps signaling, hey, we're in distress. So what happened is now my gut becomes really, really vulnerable to infection. We know that we're all exposed to parasites. They're everywhere, right? That's just a natural part of the world that we live in. But what happens is when we have a weakened host, we become really susceptible to those parasitic infections because we really become good breeding ground for them, right? They're the immune system and the gut microbes that help control the infection now don't have the resiliency and the strength that they once had. So I started to get these perpetual gut infections. And so I stayed in this place of stress that basically it's like a feedback loop. And so if you can imagine, it's like inflammation, stress signals that are now depleting digestive efforts, energy is being diverted away from the gut. So now you just become a hotbed of infection. And so even just in that one scenario, and we're talking about stress in general, you can see how it's a domino effect. Not being able to manage the stress load that you're under, or at least understand it, right? Like you cannot manage what you don't know, exists. You can't manage what you can't evaluate. So you've got to be able to take kind of an inventory of your life a little bit and say, what are the stressors I can control? We all know that there's EMF towers and we know that there's glyphosate. And to some degree, we can help filter some of that, buffer it, mitigate it, whatever that might be. But beyond that, it's so important that the stressors in your life that you do have control over. And I think, Chris, we talked about this on another episode, and some of the emotional aspect too. I definitely want to go there because it's so important. But those are the areas you've really got to manage because you don't realize the impact that your brain has on signaling through this big neuro pathway to the rest of your body. Hey, this is how we need to respond in this scenario because it could be setting you up for early stages of disease.
Yeah, Courtney, wow. I mean, you really just hit the nail on the head there because I do feel like stress is the root cause of just so many diseases. And like you explained, if stress affects your digestion, then you can't digest food, then you have malnutrition and you're not absorbing the nutrients. And then again, you just snowballs. So yeah, I feel like a lot of people are in a chronic state of stress.
Well, I agree. I think that when we're in a culture, it's alarming though how much stress that we don't, as Courtney said, really realize when we're going throughout the day. And many times, like in the office, you'll start seeing these like patterns. Do you guys see it? They'll have a patient that says, okay, I stopped having my period. I stopped having a period for 2 months and I started having it, back again. And then you start to ask, well, how's your diet? And they go, well, I'm getting the shakes. I get hypoglycemic. And then I ask about their emotional state. And they'll say, well, I'm not eating properly. I skipped meals. And what I'm trying to refer to is like whenever you start to basically damage or imbalance your vagus nerve, you're basically telling your body, like Courtney said, is to take all the blood flow out of your system, your digestive system, and divert it. And you can't break down your toxins. You can't break down the stuff that's coming in your food, whether it be bacteria or virus or parasites, properly. And so you start to have this imbalance, not only like within your metabolic system, but you'll start to see people that have blood sugar issues. And then they'll have, I'll say, hyperinsulinemia. They'll have too much insulin in the body. And then you look back at it and I go, where did it all start? Like they'll get this whole imbalance. I'm like, their stress emotions, which basically weaken their stomach and their spleen. Because in our culture today, and I hope I'm not going too rabbit trail, we're in a culture of like complete worry, right? We're literally like worried. We care for other people. That's why we're on this podcast. We care for people more than we care for ourselves. We'll do anything for anybody else. And me and Courtney talk about is like you're running, you're gunning, you're doing something for your family and such. But in Chinese medicine, they say that emotion stresses your stomach and your spleen. And so they call it the worry. Overprotectiveness, overcaring. So it completely depletes your stomach's energy and your spleen's energy. So most people will start to what? Not feel hungry, not get the full nutrients that they need. And they'll actually not take care of themselves. They'll forget to eat. They'll literally, have you ever had that people go, oh, I forgot to eat and it's about 2:00 right now. It's because the constant worry is sending a signal through that vagus nerve, basically like saying, no, I'm going to be able to just rev it as hard as I can and not be in that nice, calm state. And that will, two ways, that damages on the Western medicine side and the Eastern medicine side. So the stomach spleen is one of those areas that I always find that constant stress is definitely not going to make you hungry. It's definitely not going to take away all the infections that are in your food. But what I have seen is that not only does it perpetuate your emotions and your fatigue, you're starting to see this huge shift now where that hyperinsulinemia, where that blood sugar imbalance is starting to affect the hormones of all the ladies out there, and men too. But you're starting to see stress not only from the emotions, but it's leading into this consistent chronic biochemistry challenge in our culture today. I mean, and I'm getting on a soapbox. I'm starting to raise my voice. But when you start to see too much insulin being produced, it creates a culture of catch-22. Oh, I need more sugars. And so I'm going to raise my insulin, and then it depletes my blood sugar. So then my body's like, well, I'm getting the shakes, and I'm getting I'm getting too fidgety, and then I'm going to require it more from my fat cells. So you start to have people that are stressed, they eat more sugar, they deplete their stomach, and then you get a constant depleted, malnourished culture. I know that was a lot to say in one area, but people are malnourished. And when we're talking about stress, like you don't get enough minerals, vitamins, and amino acids or proteins or fats. We talk on the podcast at times about when an individual says, man, like Courtney and I were talking about, we take a lot of minerals and vitamins. And it's like, well, Courtney will say, well, I take just a whole bunch of vitamins and minerals because I was feeling stressed. And people say, is that too much? It's like, in our culture today, as malnourished as we can be from the stress, it's very important. I mean, I'd rather have somebody have a backlog of excess minerals and vitamins to help enhance their vagal nerve work. So all that to say, yes, stress, malnourishment is causing a hormonally challenged culture. And we're seeing the highest rates of anxiety and depression in our culture today. And it's just amazing to me that, does it start with the way you think? Yes, in my opinion. But I mean, we're in a run world. And I hope that puts everybody out there like a little bit of, let's say, encouragement. Take time to eat. Take time to love on yourself.
I mean, I got to be honest. I don't know how people like go a whole day and like forget to eat. I don't think I've ever missed a meal a day in my life, and I can be like super stressed at times. But I'm telling you, I live to eat. I'm like a girl that likes her food, so I don't know.
I was
think
just about to say the same thing, Courtney. Sorry.
But
I was
see,
like,
that's when
man,
people get the shakes,
forget.
right? They get the shakes like, I need something to eat right now.
Yeah.
But it's like, do they get the full nutrients out of their food? But it's to me, I always say it's amazing because it is like when I feel like when patients come in, you start to see these patterns, but more and more, like you guys are just talking about, it's really like, how does the emotions affect that vagus nerve? I'll be quiet, but that's my take on it.
No, that's totally true. And I want to also make a difference here of just malnourished versus underfed. Because I feel like a lot of people are not really underfed, but they are still malnourished because they're eating just unnutrient food. Like there's no nutrients in it. So you could be like, oh, I forgot to, or maybe you don't forget to eat, but then you grab something with no nutrients, right? And it's still the same thing.
Yeah. I think it's important to realize too, that the experience in eating your meal has a huge impact on your ability to assimilate the enzymes and actions necessary to absorb the nutrition from that food. So this is actually a really common thing that I saw with a lot of clients that I've worked with in the past, right? Especially women, because think about it, most of the time we're doing like 17 things at the exact same time. So we're in the car and we're throwing things in the backseat at the screaming child, and we're on the phone with our sister or whatever. And then we're trying to, look up the Pinterest recipe for dinner tonight. And then we realize we have no gas in our car. I mean, these are, this is the world we live in, right? At the same time, we're like slamming down a smoothie. And we're like wondering why all of a sudden now we feel like we look 8 months pregnant after just like slamming down a meal in the car with all of this chaos going on around us. But think about it. Your brain is not in this mode of like, hey, you need to be in rest and digest. That's why it's called rest and digest. Your body needs to be in parasympathetic in order to create this series of processes necessary to break down your food appropriately. And you don't have time to build that stomach acid. You don't have time to make the enzymes necessary that start to break down the proteins and the fat and all of these things. So then you feel terrible, right? And your stomach hurts and you're like, oh gosh, like I need to lay down. Your blood sugar is dysregulated. You're bloated. And it's just, it's awful, right? So that's not a good experience. So one of the things that I think is so helpful is really just taking a moment, even if, and listen, I get it. Like I don't have time to, a lot of times I am eating, protein bars in the carpool pickup line while I'm on a call for work. Like these are things that are happening. But here's what I'll do. I just take a moment to do like a little bit of breath work before and really focus, like actually, okay, so even if it's a protein bar, I know this sounds crazy, but I've done this and I swear it makes a difference. So just hold it in your hand, like wherever you're at, and take like 3 to 5 slow breaths, but think about the food you're about to eat, right? Like think about it. So whatever the flavors are, maybe it's like, I don't know, got some like dates or something like that. But breathe in deeply through your nose, hold your breath at the top, and really like you can even humming or like making an audible release, right? That actually tonifies the vagus nerve. There's studies that support this. So actually feel your breath, make an audible noise as you release that, right? Humming things or even putting a hand over your belly and over your chest. Really feel your chest fill up and expand with air, right? Hold it and then push it out with a whoosh. And just sit there for a moment, think about it. And I'm telling you, if you take a bite of it and then have a moment of gratitude, then maybe take another bite, your body will receive that nourishment, even if it's something that is, on the fly and it's not some gourmet salad or homemade bone broth soup. Your body will receive it differently because you've set yourself up and told your body, hey, we're about to receive food. This is going to be energetically demanding. I'm going to need blood flow, enzymes. Like think of those processes and literally honor your body like in the moments before and see if you do not notice a difference in your digestion.
Can I jump on that? I think it's a really good point, Courtney, about vagal nerve training. Whenever you do breath work, one of the things that was pointed out when I studied more about how the stomach would sit up in the diaphragm. So what happens when we get basically nervous or we get, on the go is our stomach gets tied in knots. And that's why they say my stomach's in a knot. Physiologically too, what can occur is when you're sitting in the carpool line, your diaphragm will eventually learn how to be tight. And so they call it a reactive diaphragm. They'll say like physical therapists talk about it. It's like when the vagus nerve is not operating at 100%, the diaphragm can actually get partially paralyzed. And so when you breathe, you're breathing through your chest, and you're taking out the diaphragm. You're like, I don't need you to push down. I'm going to breathe out through the chest. And as Courtney was saying, is like when you start to push down, you're actually trying to consciously, because you can subconsciously or unconsciously breathe, but you're taking a conscious effect on your diaphragm. And when you breathe down, you actually are breaking the adhesions and the stiffness of the diaphragm to basically to help nourish the stomach, because the stomach will get tight and tightened up into the diaphragm, and that will cause a hiatal hernia. That'll cause GERD, that will cause acid reflux. And so what you're trying to do with the breathing, as you're saying the Om, is that you're trying to create a frequency, a theta frequency into the vagus nerve that actually is transmitting down the vagus nerve. And while you breathe out, you're actually opening up the stomach and the diaphragm to where the blood actually gets into the stomach. And it helps definitely, like you're saying with GERD, Court, because when you tell your brain that you are going to eat this food, they talk about the gustatory effect. They've always told us in school that whenever you look at food, you can smell it, and your brain is already automatically creating the enzymes to actually break down that particular food. So when you sit down at a meal, or if you're on the go, breathing through your stomach and recognizing what you're about to eat or what you're about to drink is signaling to your body biochemically, like, this is what's coming down the hatch, and I receive it, and I want you to put out the full effect of all the enzymes I can do to eat it. And they've shown studies, like you said, that people who did that with breath work as compared to not, higher digestive rates, less GERD, less heartburn, and individuals, like even on the back, and people always have that area, the T12, that little area right where the ribs end, that area will unlock because the diaphragm opens up. You'll start seeing people with more blood flow to their stomach, and emotionally, their worries will decrease. I'm telling you, it's an effect throughout the whole system. It's not just one. It's biochemistry, emotions, structure, physiology, just from breath work. I mean, isn't that amazing, guys? I mean, to me, it's just like how your body communicates in all these avenues.
You guys know how picky I am about every ingredient and product I recommend. So, anything I personally create won't be any different. So, in case you haven't heard, I created my own supplement line called Bethany's Pantry. Nuzest has allowed me to formulate my own products under their company as a sister brand. Any and all of Bethany's Pantry products are created by yours truly, me. Every ingredient and sub-ingredient has been approved, again, by me, along with the origin of the ingredient. The taste, texture, and overall combination of ingredients in my products are created specifically for those with sensitive tummies, designed to help improve digestion, nutrient absorption, and ultimately your health, all while making it enjoyable and easy to consume and incorporate into your daily lives. Now you can be 100% sure you are getting a little sipper item if it's under the Bethany's Pantry label. I'll be rolling out with new items gradually as time goes on, but for now, I currently have these 5 items available, which are my digestive support protein powder in vanilla, cacao, and strawberry, my plant protein bake mix, and digestive support L-glutamine. These are just a few of the many items in Bethany's Pantry to come, and I can't wait to share what's next. So head on over to newzest-usa.com/Bethany's Pantry to check out everything I created. Again, that's newzest-usa.com/Bethany's Pantry. newzest-usa.com/Bethany's Pantry. My husband thinks I'm OCD when it comes to my night routine. So I wash my face, put my face serums on, tongue scrape, change my pillowcase every other night to help prevent bacteria build up when I lay my head on my pillow, which is a hot tip, you guys. Change your pillowcase. And I take my Ned Sleep Blend. Whenever I take it, I have the absolute best sleep and do not wake up groggy the next morning. There's no melatonin in it, which melatonin has actually been shown to alter your hormones because it technically is one. Did you guys know melatonin's a hormone? Ned's Sleep Blend contains not only CBD, but also CBN, which has shown in studies to specifically help sleep. Other organic botanicals shown to help sleep are also added, such as lemon balm and passion flower. All these ingredients work cohesively, creating the perfect blend to help anyone struggling with sleep. I've been a fan of Ned for about 4 years, like way before anyone actually knew about them. And I've even had the co-owner come on the show. The reason I love Ned is not only do they have products that actually work, but they're transparent with every ingredient and product they have, and everything is third-party tested. Their CBD is outdoor grown, not in a greenhouse. It's organic certified, made in small batches, and cold extracted. Many other CBD brands use chemical solvents and heat to extract the botanicals, resulting in an inferior and often toxic product. But Ned is different, and that's why I personally consume their products and even recommend it to my family. So if you're looking for a better night's sleep and want to become the best version of yourself, I highly recommend Ned's Sleep Blend. You can get 15% off all of Ned's products with code DIGEST. Just go to helloned.com/digest or enter code DIGEST at checkout. Again, that's HELLONED.com/digest to get 15% off. Thank you, Ned, for sponsoring the show and offering my listeners a natural remedy for some of life's most common health issues. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe there's even studies that have shown if you believe the food that you're about to eat is going to be nourishing and it's safe for you, you can digest it better versus like you're afraid to eat this food because you're afraid it's going to upset your digestion, right? And so people, when maybe they had a bad experience or they got food poisoning from this food, now they're afraid to eat it again and they do get a stomach upset, even though the food is technically safe.
There's really good studies, and Court, I'm not trying to overtalk, so interject. I'm just saying there's a talk, like they talk German New Medicine about when you ate something in the past and they didn't think about it or basically cultivate the program in your mind to say this food is safe. When you basically stamp the food with a continuous emotional, tag to it, you will set up programs in the brain. They'll call them Hammer fields. Like the brain will actually create small, like energetic, circles in the body or in the brain that's correlated to the organ. And so when you basically continuously say that this food is bad for me, and I don't want anybody out there eating bad, high sugar foods, but if you set the program up, you're telling your stomach to basically grow physiologically, literally grow certain tissue, like more of these types of acid producers, more of these types of enzymes to basically eat that food up. So you're going to say, well, this food's bad, so I'm going to create a certain type of biochemistry only for that particular food as it comes down the hatch. So the way you think about food literally changes how physiologically your organs are made. And so that's why when they tell you to be thankful for your food or give gratitude for your food, it's literally like you're trying to prepare your body. But German New Medicine has some really cool stuff about how your body will actually grow. Your organs will grow in a certain way in response to your psyche. And especially in the digestive system, it'll actually make people have what they call morsel conflicts. They won't want to eat because of the program they had in the brain, in their psyche. And there's always a big emotional higher mind, higher consciousness effect with the brain to the organs. So all that to say, be thankful for what you eat for and always be very mindful about how you think about your food.
Yeah. Did you have anything to add there, Courtney?
No, I love that. You're great at the German New Medicine. I mean, I just think that it just illuminates the fact that, like you said, mindset is so important. And you can even go to like just the placebo effect, right? Like they've done studies on people that have had cancer. They've got debilitating disease. And the people that actually could envision these, immune fighting compounds literally attacking their disease cells, they were actually able to create that. That became their reality because in their mind, they had already thought it's done. My body's showing up. It's doing the healing work. And those belief systems literally tell the command center of your brain and your body to activate on those things. So we have so much power. And I think if you feel overwhelmed and there are so many things in your life and you're like, I can't take any more off my plate. Like these are my responsibilities. And I realize that it's stressing me out, and me being aware of that is adding more stress. And so you're on this stress cycle, and you're just like, I'm trying to be healthy, but I don't know if there's anything else I can do. I would challenge you to just harness your thoughts as much as you can. Like take every thought captive and know that, hey, the moments you start to spiral or go down that, oh, I can't take it anymore, or, this isn't serving me and I have to do it. Just reframe it in your mind. Like, even if it's a meal that's not ideal, like there are times where I'm just like, okay, this is definitely not like what I would choose to eat. And I, don't really know about the sourcing, and there's probably seed oils, and, I can go down the rabbit hole and I can make a whole meal that, everybody else is enjoying. In my mind, I'm just like, like I know too much, but if I just reframed it in my mind and think, you know what, I'm going to have the best time. I'm going to laugh. I'm going to enjoy this. Guarantee you that meal is not going to have the detrimental effect that you think in your mind. But if you convince yourself you are, then that is the experience that you will have.
Yeah,
totally. Yeah. Well, and that's no excuse to go to McDonald's and really think that it's going to be, nourishing to your body all the time, and put those thoughts into the food. But maybe, right. But, maybe, the experience of digesting may be a little less. I don't even know. But now I know we talked about stress prior, and I kind of want to go back to that a little bit. And I want to talk about adrenal stress. What brings us burnout? Like how do we get there? Because I know a lot of people are burned out right now. And I also feel like some people are addicted to stress. And when you're addicted, and I'm actually guilty of it myself, where my husband will be like, Bethany, you need to like take some things off your plate. You need to, maybe not do this project or that project. And I'll try it. And I'm like, I need to do something. Like I need to like be constantly doing something.
I think that you hit it nail on the head, though. It is addictions, and we all have it. Like we all get to that point when we have that adrenaline outburst or noradrenaline. I think burnout too is, I always view the adrenal glands as basically the turbo. I always think that the thyroid is always the spark plug, right? It's the first initial spark from the brain. The brain signals to your thyroid to, hey, we need some energy. So the thyroid's like, okay, well, I'll put some hormones out to attach to my cells, and they'll start producing ATP, energy molecules. And then your adrenal glands start to look into it and go, heavens, I better help this thyroid out, because they want perpetual energy. And so your body will produce, adrenaline or cortisol or noradrenaline. And so whenever they get to a burnout phase, normally I always will look at the thyroid and see if the thyroid's getting close to burnout, because usually people are going to get into a burnout phase because they keep initiating a thought. So it's always, to me, it's like, what is the initiating thought that would cause their adrenals to burn out? Taking that, I also conform it to Chinese medicine. One of the biggest things is like the adrenal glands, whenever we talk about burnout, they sit on top of the kidneys. So the adrenal glands are right on top of the kidneys physiologically. And so the Chinese medicine practitioner usually thinks that they're one unit. And the cool thing about the kidneys are they're a grounding organ. So if you're listening out there, if you ever had chronic UTIs, chronic bladder infections, chronic, urinary tract infections, and those things can actually deplete the kidneys and the adrenals at the same time. So what am I trying to say? When we have burnout, the kidneys and the adrenals are acting in one. But what is the emotions of kidney? Fear. So most people will go into a state of fear. Not fear like you're afraid of everything that comes around the corner. But in our culture today, it's the fear of moving forward. The fear I'm stuck. The fear I cannot get along with this person because they're unbending. That's the thing with that fear. I'm going to be left behind. People are going to advance more. So when we get addicted to adrenaline, it can be based on that fear, like, I'm going to get stuck back here and I'm not going to advance. So when that occurs, fear is the driver that can make the kidneys very depleted, and the adrenal glands sit on top of it and they get depleted as well. They will burn out. They are the fire element. They're the hot element. The kidneys, the water. It will dry the kidneys out. It's a catch-22. They start to work in unison. So I hope that makes sense. When we talk about adrenal burnout, remember this. Yes, it's looking at your adrenaline. Yes, it's looking at your cortisol and your thyroid. But look at your fears, because your fears are what's going to make that whole system in your adrenal glands very depleted. And you'll notice that when individuals have adrenal burnout, when they come into the office, first thing I always ask them is, did you ever have a UTI or chronic kidney infection or chronic yeast infections? And I will say out of 10 people, 9 will always say they had that when they were a kid because the emotion was probably passed from a parent. One of their parents was one of those people that was afraid they couldn't move forward in life or they had chronic fears. So that's our culture we're living today. That's my aspect of it. But what kind of nutrients do we need to do? I think Courtney's really good at that. And I don't want to take too much of the time, but that's my aspect with Chinese medicine on the adrenal burnout.
Yeah, what are you have to share, because I know what you'll probably likely say, but I want you to share the herbs, because you always have great herbal recommendations. And guys, it's been a real stressful season personally. So just in full disclosure, this has been a very relevant thing in my life. And so I've actually gone to Chris for a lot of support in this, but I feel like that might be helpful for somebody if they find themselves in that pattern of stress burnout and they just think, hand me a life raft. Like, I don't even know how to help myself anymore. I'm like teetering on the edge of, emotional breakdowns or physical breakdowns, whatever it might be. And some people may need a little bit to take the edge off. So
definitely.
I'm asking you, but I just,
She's like,
I want to know too.
Yeah.
But it's like when the adrenals come into play, the first thing that I always say is always look for your minerals, because my first thought is always to go to coffee or to something like high amounts of caffeine. And caffeine will deplete quite a bit of your magnesium stores and your calcium stores. So what you always have to find out, though, is when you have adrenal burnout or kidney fatigue, remember your kidneys help filter out minerals. So that's the nerd aspect of it. You have to nourish that because you're going to be depleted in minerals. So I always say, do a good multi-mineral. Even if it's a good ionic multi-mineral, you need a good sufficient amount of magnesium and the additional trace minerals. So don't make it complicated. Then I always try to find out what can make you feel relaxed. I always suggest Albizia. And Courtney knows when we have our filming days here, Albizia is come from the silk tree and Albizia supreme. And it will not give habit-forming effects on your body. It literally is used in China, Korea, Japan, and it will give you this nice, even kill. Like you're like, man, I can approach this. This is not going to overload me. So I suggest that. And everything that can build the adrenals, like the adaptogens. I love good mushrooms or multi-mushrooms if you can handle. But mushrooms are they build immune so much. You be careful if you have like an autoimmune issue because it can make you too immune forced in your body. But I love reishi mushroom. I love shiitake. I love all the adaptogenic mushrooms. I love suma root. Suma root's used by a lot of bodybuilders, but suma root is so good for the endocrine system. And you can use that as a powder in your smoothie. You could do it every day. And other people will add ashwagandha. Now, those are really 3 simple ones that you guys can do. Like to me, that bar none that you guys can choose. You don't have to choose all of them. But remember, minerals, Albizia, and any of those that I just mentioned will start to stimulate the adrenal glands and build the fire. Because what happens, right, Court? And when we get to that point in our lives when we're so depleted, we have no passion. Like that is the biggest thing in Chinese medicine for the adrenals and the heart, the fire. You have that passion, direction, you don't have force, but you don't. When you wake up in the morning and you don't get up without any type of drive, you're in adrenal burnout. That's just given. You start using these herbs. They're not your savior. I'm just saying you start to take them and nourish them, get some good water in your body, always ground, get your feet in the dirt, always ground. And for heaven's sake, don't skip meals. And you'll start to notice that you'll actually get a little more fire in your gut. You'll get a little more fight, and that's what you want. So with that, those are my main herbs that I find that work really well. If for anybody out there listening, I laugh at this. I've given people Albizia, okay, guys, and like Courtney knows, and I'll say, just take one of these in the morning, one of these at night, and they'll come back to me and they go, oh my goodness. I have one lady, I always tell stories. This lady, her daughter would come in, and I don't think this young lady likes me. I don't think she ever has. Whenever she gets treated, never liked me. I know her grandparents and everything. Okay, I don't know why, but she was like, her attitude's a little off all the time. And I was like, and I checked her and I tested it, and basically when I put that Albizia right in her body, her heart meridians just loved it, settled down. They do not skip a beat. They literally will call me and go, "We're running low," and I skipped the other day, and I can tell she cannot be off of it. So build those adrenals. Use the happy pill if you can, Albizia. You'll love it.
Happy.
Okay.
Huge fan of Albizia. Huge fan.
You are. And then everything you're mentioning too are in capsule form, like even the mushrooms, right? Like people don't have to go out and like forage these mushrooms. They can always take them in supplement form. But a question I do get asked a lot on my Instagram is because a lot of people have gut issues or they're suffering from SIBO or some sort of yeast overgrowth. And they're like, is it okay to take mushrooms, even medicinal mushrooms, if you're susceptible to yeast and overgrowth?
Well, I will say this, and I'm not trying to like, you can take it, definitely. I mean, there's no question, like whenever you think about penicillin, remember back in the day, guys, we took penicillin to fight off bacteria or fight off another fungus. It's a fungus. You can use the components of a very nourishing mushroom, all those small phytonutrients that are in those components of all those mushrooms, and they'll clean up yeast and bacteria. They're not going to give you more yeast or candida. In fact, one of the main things I use for candida or fungus is reishi. And that's one thing I always wondered is like, can they have an allergy or sensitivity to a mushroom? But honestly, I've used those many times with fungus and with yeast. So for all of you out there that wonder, I'm like, no, you can use the good guys to fight off the bad guys. What about you, Court? What do you think?
I totally agree. I love Ganoderma reishi spores, and I do get those in capsules, and I actually will break the capsules open and I'll put them in a tea because I actually kind of like the taste of it. But coming from someone over here that's had, like I said, massive gut infections, so bad. You got to think about yeast and candida as opportunistic infections, meaning that they are generally secondary to something that is much bigger, that is pummeling and beating up your immune system. So that to me, if you're somebody that's dealing with yeast and candida and you're like, oh gosh, if any one little thing gets a little bit, any meal or whatever, it sends me into a flare, I would go a little bit heavier on some anti-parasitics and some binding and things like that. I even have found coffee enemas, which, I'm a big coffee enema girl. I mean, they changed the game for me. I mean, there were a lot of things I could not do because here's the thing too, before I get into a rabbit trail, but this is important to think about. If your gut is inflamed and you have infections, your ability to break down and metabolize supplements is compromised. So it's really hard to ask your liver and your gut to actually make use of the things that you're taking orally. Coffee enemas are especially helpful for people that are very vulnerable, meaning their digestive system is just not at full capacity. In fact, it's very limited, right? It has marginal capacity. And so you can start with something like a water enema. And I've done other podcasts. I bring this up all the time because I've seen it work for so many people. And I am talking about putting coffee up your butt. If you're like, is that what she's talking about? That is what I'm talking about. But they are a game changer. And if you want to supercharge your liver, because I think most people are super toxic and that's what keeps feeding into these infections, right? Because parasites love to feed off of mold and other types of toxins. I mean, they just eat that stuff up. They're like the cookie monster, right? They just keep, and which then makes them populate and proliferate and then create biofilms and they attract all these other things that keep creating dysbiosis. So really supercharging it and helping your liver gallbladder out to help stimulate bile to trap up and bind up these toxins and get rid of some of these biofilms that are creating extra dysbiosis is so important. So that's another little strategy there. You may or may not be on the enema bandwagon, but I will say love herbs, love mushrooms. But I'm telling you, if you really want to, start to feel well. Like I had a girl DM me just yesterday and she was like, I've been doing enemas for the last 3 months. Like it has changed my life. She was like, my hormones, which isn't that crazy to think about your sex hormones being affected by doing enemas, but you start clearing up the toxicity, right? And now the body's like, oh, we got room. We're not fighting all of this infection. We can actually start working on your reproductive hormones because that all gets cabled, right? So.
No, I'm a huge proponent. Go ahead.
I would say when Courtney, we talked about enemas, I have so much respect for colonics and colon therapy and how it affects the neurological system. And this is not to sound like heady or smart about it, but when we talk about a coffee enema, sometimes me and Courtney will joke about it on a podcast, but I have so much respect because like Courtney said, I have had patients that come in and they will show a recurring signal of chronic infection, such as parasites, yeast, mold, or bacteria. And people out there is like, that's me. Every time I go to a practitioner, I'm finding that in my body. two of my patients really took it upon themselves, and I've had many over the years, that they did coffee enemas, and they started doing coffee enemas every day. The mother and daughter team. And when the daughter came in, the mother came in, she was doing really well. The daughter came in, I didn't know she was doing a coffee enema, but all of her pulse points, all of her signaling from her tongue analysis, all the biofeedback I was doing, looked back, and I mean, almost all of her infection signals were clear. And when you look in Chinese medicine on the body, I don't have my Chinese medicine doll, but usually you'll have painful points on the knees, the hips, the ankles. Those are all the points of the liver, the gallbladder, and the kidneys. She was flushing them out. And one thing I find in our culture is we're so emotionally and physically constipated. When you start flushing it out, people don't realize that when you put the coffee up there or the water and you start to loosen up the bile that's not moving out of your colon, because your bile will get stuck there and it'll recirculate. If you don't flush it out, it'll send a signal back up to the liver and say, don't stop producing bile. So you'll start getting cholesterol buildup in the body and you'll start getting sticky sludge in your gallbladder. That will ruin your methylation. Your liver methylation patterns will go crazy. You can take all the nutrients you want, but if you can't poop it out, the bile will build up in the colon. And so you want to use the enema to push all that sludge out. And then that will do what? It will take all those toxins from those infections out. I mean, I'm literally so impressed with these patients that I'm like, I wish all my patients did them. Now, people will say this, though. They'll go, well, does it really affect your emotions? Yes. Your methylation is what regulates ADD, ADHD, OCD, bipolar. You have to use the liver cleansing to help you modulate your B vitamin processing. So when we talk about something they say as simple as a coffee enema, kudos to Courtney and letting people know. And that, like castor oil packs, keep doing them because those will help your emotion. That will reduce your vagal nerve sympathetic tone. It'll make you feel more relaxed. It will heal your brain if you get the colon cleaned out. And I know many of your listeners know that, though. But I just want to reiterate, if you guys are ever in doubt, don't be doubtful about an enema. They help so much.
No, enemas are great. Well, when I was really, really sick and just skin and bones, I had to do them too. And I don't know what I would do without them. And I had to do even colonics, and just because to get all those toxins out of my body. And even today, just talking about a simple bowel movement, after I have a bowel movement, I can think clearer. Like my head, I'm like, okay, like I'm sharper and everything like that. And so don't underestimate a good bowel movement.
I am with you. I remember when we did, I hope I'm not taking too much time, but I remember I did colonics for 6 months straight because when I had Lyme disease very badly. And I remember the first 3 months, I felt like I was having the flu on a gravity-fed system because it was pulling so much of the viral load because I had high Epstein-Barr. And I remember like by the third or fourth month, I remember I was like, oh, I didn't get a fever this time. And like you said, then my brain started to work. And I was like, can you imagine all the crud that's just built up in the walls of your colon and it's just seeping back into your bloodstream and your brain's trying to operate on like sludge? And then I thought, if we all just got a nation to poop, we would see biggest change. Because, you go to a hospital. My mom was in a hospital for some health stuff. She didn't have a bowel movement. And I was trying to, for 4 days. And they didn't think anything was wrong with that. And
that's like so common these days, though.
I'm the time.
Shocked. People will say that. They're like, oh, I haven't pooped in 2 weeks. I'm like, what?
Oh, man, we can go through stories, guys. And I hope that we don't take your time away, you guys' time away. But it's, going. I mean, I had a kid that come in and he'd always go, he has autism. And he would say, Dr. Motley goes, my back is killing me. It's killing me. He just kept saying it. And I had to say he'd have gas when he come in the office and it'd be really bad gas. Finally, he had some. And I said, well, can you go to this other chiropractor, get some daily or weekly adjustments? Took an x-ray. He had functional constipation. He had so much fecal matter poop backed up in his descending colon. It was pushing up into his diaphragm. It was literally up towards his stomach. And it was wide. And he had to take like 5 magnesium at night. And he wouldn't do an enema. But he started doing that. And his mood changed. His mom's like, oh, he's totally like calmed down. And I thought over these years, he's like, he had some poop coming out. But I'm saying like the clarity of mind and the emotions that are affected with it. I mean, I tell people, you may be pooping, but you may not be getting all the toxins into your poop to get out. So that's why I really, I'm always going with enemas and such, because toxins can hide in the walls of the colon.
Yeah. Well, Courtney, and you were talking about too, you had mentioned the connection between your gut health and your hormones and how those are just so connected, especially if you're having gut issues. And a lot of people are trying to regulate their hormones, and a lot of people with gut issues have hormonal imbalances. So what advice can you give to those people?
Honestly, I think a lot of women are dealing with a high toxic burden. And I think that think about our hormones. They're chemical messengers. And so we know that a lot of the chemicals that we are exposed to they somewhat mimic, right? They can mimic a lot of estrogens. They can hijack hormone receptor sites on the cell. It gets very confusing for the body really, really quickly. On top of that, all of these chemical exposures, whether it's something that we're breathing or it's something we're putting on our skin or it's something that we're ingesting through our food, it has to be metabolized and processed. And like Dr. Motley said, there are methylation, there's genetics, there's all of these things that are involved that require different nutrients and different phases of detoxification. You run into a couple kinks in the hose, you've got a couple roadblocks, like you've got clogged bile ducts, or you're not assimilating enough nutrients for phase 1 detoxification. Like you can't go from fat soluble to water soluble. You don't have the right nutrients there. So then you've got to back up at phase 2. Or you've got slow motility, right? So maybe your gut's inflamed and you've got infections and biofilm, so you're not pooping. So then all this stuff starts to back up upstream. Well, all of that goes straight upstream to your hormones. And I'm telling you, the first thing for women to go haywire and sideways are your sex hormones, because your body knows that you don't need to procreate. That is not a necessity for you to live. But what is required for you to live is to transport oxygen and blood flow and things like that. Those take precedence all the time. So your hormones, your sex hormones, will be sacrificed and your body will adapt in the short term. Your body's never thinking long term either. So you got to think about that. Your body's always thinking, I'm going to keep you alive in the here and now. So if it means I have to short circuit the system, then that's what it will do. But the problem is that never just stays short term or acute for somebody. It ends up long term, right? Because these exposures are perpetual. Most of the time, we don't even realize all of it, right? And we're living in a house with mold that, our body is trying to sequester mold now. And now we've got that kind of hijacking a lot of different things. So there's so many things to consider, but, and I don't want to fearmonger or make people feel like, oh my gosh, like this is a can of worms, like my whole body is doomed, because it's not true. Here's the thing. You can really simplify things by just detoxifying a few areas of your body, right? You've got to just look at where the exposure is coming from. And mental thoughts, like toxic thought patterns, that's a big one, right? So I would just the biggest thing that's helped me in that category is start writing things down, because I'm telling you, you do not realize how many things that you're feeding yourself because you're kind of unaware, right? You think like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not valued by somebody, or, I'm never going to be able to do anything other than what I've already done. Like when you start putting that on paper, you start seeing the things that you're telling yourself, you get really kind of surprised. I'm like, I would never say those to anybody else. Like, but that's on a loop in my mind. So write those things, like get them out, and then have a moment to be able to say, like, is this the identity that I want to create for myself? Like, is this my identity? Because otherwise, like, you need to bury that. Like, you need to grieve that and be like, that's an old identity. I'm not taking that forward into the person that I know I'm called to be. And then you need to outline what the characteristics of that person is. That person's strong. That person is resilient. That person can overcome challenges on, daily, and be joyful and really know that you are stepping into a purpose and something greater in your life. And then beyond that, it's chemical exposures from your food, air, water. Those are big ones. Water, guys, filter your water always. I'm sure there's a lot of other episodes that are just down, they're everywhere. And I'm sure you've got some, Bethany, but like, make sure you have a good water filter. Just simplify, but go through kind of a checklist, your food, your air, your water, the things that you're putting on your body, and the things that are in your home. So if you've never evaluated what your environment is, like, do you have toxic, paints, or a mattress, that maybe has flame retardants and things, like, just start going through the checklist. But I feel that those can be really helpful, because a lot of times people will just they're like splitting hairs with their hormones, like doing all this expensive testing. And I'm like, if we can just detoxify your life a little bit, take some of the burden off, You don't have to do the work. Your body does it for you.
And I do have a question too, just about emotions, right? Because emotions are just such an important aspect. Can our emotions be stored in our body, in our organs, and affect that?
Definitely so. That's one of the biggest premises in Chinese medicine. They call it the shen, or the mind of the organ. So they would relate that each organ has the capacity, their ability to process certain emotions more than another organ, or they have separate emotions that they're geared for. But if you look at each organ physiologically, they do have the biochemistry to handle life situations different than another organ. For example, can it be stored? And I think that's a great question. It's like if somebody stores grief. Let's say you had a grieving mechanism and you had a trauma when you're young, and your parent said, no, don't you cry. Don't you cry about that. That's nothing to cry about. Well, your body has to release. We know now that there's toxins that you must release through your tears. There's toxins that you should release through your breath, because you mystify toxins in your lungs and push it out. If you train yourself not to cry, in essence, you keep all of those toxic material in your tears and in your body, and they recirculate. And so in Chinese medicine, what they say is it basically will store the frequency, the energy of the grief or the crying within the organ. And so you're actually basically actuating at that frequency within the organ. So you can actually store certain emotions, not only biochemically, but in the frequency realm and in the spiritual realm in an organ. And so if you're not expressing that, if you're not letting it loose, then that's what Courtney was saying. You start to have a backup into other organs. So Chinese medicine would say the lungs, you're not grieving, you're not crying. You're not releasing the hormones that help you release the grief. That can back up in the Chinese time clock up into the organs that fed the lungs in a prior hour. So I know this is a little bit too complicated for some out there, but if you have the lungs, you look up and it's going to be what? The liver. The liver passes all of its chi up down into the lungs early in the morning. It's trying to get you strengthened up to breathe that air, breathe the pollen, breathe the toxins, go and cry it out when you're in a bad relationship or something of that sort. So what it does, it'll back up into the liver, and the liver's emotion is anger. So then you'll start to go, now I'm angry and I'm grieving. So can it be stored? It definitely can be stored. And what you can know and be very calm and confident about is how Courtney said, if you just focus in on your breathing, on having good bowel movements, on drinking good water and having a good diet, you'll start to flush the organs and you'll have a ripple effect. You'll notice your emotions get better, but there is a storage capacity within the body. And I'm telling you, I've seen acupuncture, and you guys know it, acupuncture. I've seen things open up the chi to the different organs, the electricity, and it allows the body to release them. And I just went on a whole tangent, but that's my aspect of it. Courtney, take it away.
No, I love that. You're so good with the emotion stuff. I can tell Chris, like, I'll be like, oh my gosh, I've been getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And he's like, oh, you're processing your grief. And I was like, oh, you're right. I mean, it's just
you don't even have to
crazy,
say anything to me, Chris. You understand.
I know. Well, it's, here's the thing, like, it's all connected, your emotions, your spiritual health, your physical health. And so, you can like I said, you can get as granular as you want about your physiology, but to some level, you've got to be able to consider your actual life, like what it has, the value on your life, and that the really at the end of the day, like, you do have value. And so, wanting to have all the biohacking tools and wanting to have the latest supplement, like, that's all fun. And like, I love learning about that stuff too and utilizing them. But I'm more interested in the person I'm becoming, like the substance of who I am. And I feel that the more I get connected to that, the more I'm connected to my purpose. I have so much clarity as to what my body really needs. Like, does it need me to take a break? Do I need to step away? What is it I need to say no to? Because some of y'all are doing everything because you feel like if you did it all, then maybe you would prove to yourself that you have more worth. And I feel like I'm maybe preaching a little bit, but you may just need to know that. Like, once you know your value, once you know what's placed on your life and what's at stake, if you don't accomplish your mission, then that's the point where you can really harness like that. That's the substance. Like, that's what counts at the end of the day. And I'm telling you, it makes the physiological stuff way easier because you're connected to yourself in a way that you never were before. So anyway,
that's beautiful,
guys, I don't know.
Beautiful.
I went
No,
straight pulpit like preacher,
No, that's
Baptist,
beautiful.
Southern Baptist
I love
church
it.
on you.
No. Keep going. And I love the different aspects and different ways that you guys both bring it together from different points and areas. And I mean, you guys, I have so many more questions that I just want to dive into, but I know just for time's sake, maybe we'll just have to have you guys back. But what is one thing that my listeners can take away from this episode, if you had to choose?
Here's my encouragement to you. Wherever you're doing today, wherever you're listening to this, know that you're doing better than you think you are. Your body is more resilient and it's stronger than you think it is, because in our minds, oftentimes we start to look at all the deficiencies and we look in the mirror and we think like, okay, well, I'm aging and I've got an extra 10 pounds on and I haven't changed anything and I'm working out hard. I want you to know, if nobody else tells you today, that there is incredible value in who you are and what it is that you're here to do. And if you can show up for that next version of yourself and accept that you are worthy of that person, you are going to do incredible things. And I'm telling you, your body, it will show up. You just need to claim it. Like, it's there for you. So you own that. And I'm telling you, see if, like, we started with vagal tone and mindset and all of these things, like, all of that can come together. It can come into focus for you. Sometimes you just need to find like an inner strength in you and believe that there is something even greater, that there's greater healing, and you're going to receive that greater healing. And in that, like, you'll start to see all the little pieces will assimilate for you in the physiological standpoint. But be encouraged by that, because I think we live in a world where people are very isolated and they feel lonely. And you know what? A lot of people aren't told that they're doing a good job. And a lot of people don't feel that they're valued. So know that you are seen, you are loved, you are called, you are valued, you're equipped, and you are meant to do great things.
Man, I don't know if I can follow that at all, but that's amazing. Man, good on you, Court. Yes, I mean, just to try to add in, and basically tag along with what Courtney was saying, is knowing yourself. If you want to take anything away from today, is listening to, people will say listen to your body, but pay attention to, like Courtney said, write down and paying attention to what you actually feel. The reason I say pay attention is I always say, look at the words you constantly use to describe yourself or what you're feeling. And the reason I say that, and not to make it complicated, when I check somebody, I always say, is it always fear? Are you recognizing this fear in your life, or do you always have worry? But don't be afraid of it. In fact, the only way in Chinese medicine we always try to find a solution is that you embrace it, because not only does it tell me which organ probably is the problem, but it gives you what? It gives you the opposite of what you really desire. So if you're actually feeling like, oh goodness, I have the fear of moving forward, I can't move forward in life, pay attention to that. Because it doesn't mean that you need to take 50,000 steps today and go, okay, I'm going to move forward and I'm going to make it all right now. I'm like, no, recognize that there is that part of your personality and your heart and your psyche that's, coming to the surface. But then you can sort of switch it around and you can start to make those tiny steps. And when I say tiny steps, like for me, it would be like, you have fear. Let's start to nourish the kidneys. Let's start to nourish how your hip flexors. And I don't want to be too complicated, but I want you to take away is find those emotions, those fear mechanisms, and write them down and start to really understand them about yourself. And when you do, you can start to make those turn patterns and start to see, well, what's the opposite view? Just like Courtney said, what is the opposite view? Is it to totally run away from that fear? No, use the fear. I always say you can only find peace through the storm if you're going through the storm. You're only going to find contentment if you're in a hard place. And so you need to use the hard place to find out how to find your peace. So don't neglect you. Don't neglect that part of you. Like it's fear. Okay, study it, understand it. And that's the first step, in my opinion. Like, just like Courtney said, you have to understand yourself a bit more. And we're in a culture today, Bethany, I think that we're always taught like it's a problem, push it away. And I just got to get it. No, you have to understand, because everything is like the iceberg. It's underneath the surface. You have to find out what's underneath that surface. So I hope that helps. With what Courtney said, I hope we gave you guys some insight. Thanks, Bethany, so much for having us on today.
Oh, man, I love it. I can't wait for this episode to actually air because I'm going to be listening to it myself over and over again. This is just great information. And I love you guys and know that you are always welcome back.
We'll be back.
Thanks for having us.
Love
yeah, this was fun.
This is great. Me and Courtney are pretty good hangs. I actually want everybody to know that. We really are. We get,
You guys are great. I think that we should definitely have you back. And man, this is going to be one of my favorite episodes for sure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We're going to have you on ours. It's going to be great. So everybody listen in. It's coming out soon.
It's going to be fun. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to this episode of Digest This. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review in your podcast app to let us know. If you're ever wondering how you can support me and this podcast, sharing it with your friends and family is the best way. This is a Resonant Media production produced by Drake Peterson and edited by Mike Fry. To email the show, message us at digestthispod@gmail.com. See you next time. The content of this show is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for individual medical and mental health advice and does not constitute a provider-patient relationship. As always, talk to your doctor or health team first.
If you're looking to take back your health, it's time for you to listen to the Real Foodology podcast. From the producer of Digest This comes one of Apple Podcast's top 10 nutrition shows, hosted by integrative nutritionist and real food activist Courtney Swan. The Real Foodology podcast is on a mission to change the way we eat. Courtney interviews doctors, food experts, health professionals, and nutrition pioneers to bring you the best info so you can thrive. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of how impactful our food choices are. But it's never too late to start on the path of better health choices. You'd be so surprised how resilient our bodies are when we start taking care of them. Yes, it's overwhelming, but that's why Courtney's here to help. She breaks it down for you and makes the information more accessible so that you can make more informed decisions in the grocery aisle or restaurant. Listen to the Real Foodology podcast today on your favorite podcast app. New episodes every Wednesday. Produced by Drake Peterson and Resonant Media.